Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's a little more comfortable. Today it's 66 degrees and the humidity is 57. And so Thomas Jefferson has delivered all about the weather except for the speed of the wind, which is 8 miles an hour, though I don't feel any of it right now. I think that the most important issues about our government right now are about the question, is it working? And the answer is, it's too soon to tell. So, for example, there are sounds on the Hill that Gates is a person too far down the road to be considered seriously to become the Attorney General of the United States. But the thing that I find distressing is our emphasis on whether or not he slept with minors. Yes, that's terrible, and that's a good reason not to make him the Attorney General, but that's not the best reason. The truck going the other direction. That's not the best reason. The best reason is that he has no idea how to be an Attorney General. He's a bomb thrower. He had 2 years of practice. Those of us who clerked and did all sorts of things before the first time we stood up in court as a federal prosecutor were learning on the job. And we studied with others who had done it, and it was a pretty intense gauntlet, if you will. But there were people there to help, and we were immersed in the law because we either had been in private practice or we had worked for a judge, submitting bench memos on what we suggested the judge might or might not do in a case. And so this is at a bare minimum, and Gates hasn't had any of that experience. And practicing 2 years, I have no idea what he did, but did he sit in the back room summarizing depositions? What did he do? And what does he know about running a large government operation? Nothing. So I focus on these things because I think the real issue here, and I know I'll be submerged in a sea of blather, that this other thing is more important. But as an institution, the thing that's important is, can this guy do the job? Can he do it fairly and justly? Can we trust him and stuff like that? And by those measures, we can't. And so when the Constitution, Section 2, Clause 2, I think it is, invokes the Senate's ability to advise the president and to consent or not to a nominee, that is the issue. So, number one, the first cognizable problem with our government aborting under Board Trump, that is his nominations. And there are others, and we could go through those. Okay, so number one, we have Trump ignoring the Constitution as to the proper relationship between the executive and the legislative. And the legislative is supposed to look at his nominations and decide whether they meet the test or not. Now, I would be pretty comfortable saying from the public what I know about this guy, that he's got no business being the Attorney General. He had little business being a member of Congress. And then you could start invoking these other things, and yes, they should be provided to the Senate. But the only reason we're hearing about them so much and who did whom and why and so forth, as we did once before when this was hot on the frying pan and we were looking at what the Justice Department was doing, it's sexy. People want to hear about it. But that's not the important thing for the government. The important thing for the government is that those beefy characters over in the Senate actually do their damn jobs. That they review the individual, they do it seriously, they ask him or her questions if he hasn't withdrawn or resigned from the nomination, and then they make a vote and they decide. And if this guy is approved to be the Attorney General, then the Republicans have got to stick up their you-know-what, because it's being handled and manhandled by Trump, and they have no identity, and they're giving up the powers that the Constitution gave them, that our founders gave them, including the Federalists among them. So that's number one. So what's number two? Number two is the proposal as to how Trump is going to rid America of 11 million migrants. Now, he was posed a question as to whether or not this was his plan or not, and his response was that it was true, that he planned to declare a national emergency and use military assets to reverse the Biden invasion per a mass deportation program. Wow. Now, I suppose the first time anybody hears this, they're saying, can he do that? And the second thing they're probably thinking, if they know any history at all, is did we do something like this with the Japanese in World War II? Wasn't that a scandalous activity? And what camps are we going to create to hold these people as we move them from jobs and homes at the destruction of businesses across the nation in certain areas where Americans don't take those jobs, and the work wouldn't get done if these people who are identified as aliens, not unlawful migrants or whatever would be or may be appropriate, and deal with them on that score. Now, I have spoken before about the Alien and Sedition Acts. In my opinion, it is front and center the reason that John Adams didn't have a second term in office and that Jefferson had it instead, because he succeeded him. And what was going on? Well, the Alien and Sedition Acts were Adams' way to fight back on behalf of the Federalists against the Jeffersonians. And the aliens, it never came to pass that they could identify aliens for the French or British that would justify using the Alien Act, which was to expel certain people based on a relationship with a warring government. But they did use the Sedition Act, which was basically an attack on the First Amendment. So if you said something against the government, that could be considered seditious, and you could be prosecuted. And there were people prosecuted, and they were Jeffersonian Republicans. So when it came time to consider renewing Adams' option, the nation said no. And after 2 terms in office, Jefferson had basically eliminated the Federalist Party of those days. Now, the one act standing is an Alien Enemies Act. And this purports to be what Trump relies on to get military assets. Now, this is another example of him trying to have the military handle domestic questions, which is anathema, by the way. And the act that he cites does not give him the power to do this. So let's go over it a little bit. It's Title 50, U.S. Code, sections 21 to 24. And it requires mandates that there be a question about non-citizens in a time of war. There is no war presently that has anything to do with the migrants, aliens, whatever you want to call them. Now, there has to be a declared war between the United States and another nation, state, or government. Or there can be predatory incursions perpetrated, but again, has to be by a nation state. And then they're liable to be apprehended. Now, in the language that Trump uses, it looks like he's aware of the predatory incursions prong, but he ignores the fact that to invoke that prong, there has to be a foreign government, a foreign nation state involved with the migrants who are here. Now, the reason we have, well, I don't know if the number's right, but we keep talking about a number, 11 million, maybe more, I don't know. And this is over a number of years. You can't connect this to a predatory government trying to attack us. And in particular, those who come here very often are talking about asylum to escape the government they came from that was compromising and destroying them. Now, it's very interesting that the code provisions, Title 50, U.S. Code, Section 22, it allows the so-called aliens time to settle their affairs. So it's not like you just sweep them up in a paddy wagon, all apologies to my Irish kin, and take them off and leave them off at the border, or shoot them out of cannons, or whatever the hell they think they're going to do. You have to allow them time to settle their affairs. There are exceptions, but you can be sure they'll rightly be invoked. Now, that's not the end of it, though. Section 23 of Title 50, U.S. Code, says that the aliens come before the court, and the court makes a decision. And in Trump's images, I don't know about you, but I see something like I'd expect from the high holy days of Hitler's conspiracy against humans, particularly Jews, rounding them up in the street. We're not going to have a crystal knocked, are we, in which we knock down buildings and neighborhoods where people who are Hispanic, it's just impossible. Anyhow, the court, according to Section 23, is supposed to review those aliens who come before the court and decide what is the appropriate justice. So, Trump can't ignore that people not born here actually have a right under our Constitution to the same civil liberties, particularly due process, which is just another way to say fundamentally fair. But my best section, if I were handling this, and nobody's asked me, and there's going to be pretty painful to litigate these things, but the last thing that I noticed in the code, Title 50, U.S. Code, Section 24, is that who executes whatever the judge decides? Say the judge says, we're going to expel you from the United States. Who implements that ruling? The marshal. The U.S. Marshal in the courtroom does. Now, the marshal can employ others to help him, but in no place is it said, however improperly it may have been done before, that this process is executed by military assets, by either any of our armed forces, or I don't know, there's no basis for this. Okay, so what is my point? My point is, some senators are pushing back on the first question about Gates, and I suspect in the days ahead there'll be a lot of pushback to this cockamamie idea about how we're going to sweep up all these people and throw them out of the United States. Another glorification of mayhem and chaos and hate and discrimination and brutality. That's what Trump sees, because he's the original amoral man. He's a man without a conscience. He's a man that's trying to drive this nation by these catalysts of unfair and inappropriate and unconstitutional acts to stimulate fear. I think of Hunter Thompson, fear and loathing. Trump's loathing, the populace's fear. So more people have trouble getting to sleep at night because of this asshole. That's my formal legal term for anybody who deserves no more respect than that. And I think we need to find a way to talk about him other than say Trump or the orange ogre or any of those things that fit him. So I spent a little bit of time on this because we don't talk about the main issues. The main issue is, what is the pathway for Trump to become the dictator he wants to be on day one? And the answer is, it is to catch him in a cul-de-sac getting wrong, first of all, how you nominate people to be in your cabinet and what steps you must take consistent with the Constitution to do that. Another is, what statutory power grants you the ability to just gather up people based on how they look, put them in a bus and drive them to Mexico? That's the beginning of the definition of a tycoon, a traitor, a dictator. And we have to acknowledge it and stop moaning and get after this guy. If senators come forward, they should start saying these things, because they took the same oath that this guy's supposedly going to take in January if he's not found out before that date. So that's what I got on my mind, and here I am in the Cathedral of Trees. And with any luck, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.